was soft that evening, moving like a sigh across the endless fields of the new world. Beyond the fading horizon, the last rays of sunlight melted into the amber of the grasslands, while a lonely figure walked westward, his silhouette long and thin under the weight of a sky that seemed too vast for one man to cross. His name was Johnny, though most people would later call him Johnny Appleseed. No one truly knew where he came from. Some said he was born under a comet. Others whispered he had once been a preacher who lost his voice. But the truth was simpler. Johnny carried a dream inside him, small, fragile, yet unyielding. In his worn satchel were not gold coins, nor maps, nor tools of trade, but apple seeds, hundreds of them. They clicked gently in rhythm with his steps, like tiny heartbeats, reminders of something pure that the world had not yet forgotten. Every night, as he camped by the riverside or beneath the trembling stars, Johnny would speak softly to the seeds, as if they could hear him. "You'll grow," he'd say, "even where men see only wilderness. You'll grow because you must." The frontier was still wild, then, untamed, uncertain and vast. Forests stretched like a green ocean, unbroken by fences or roads. Wolves howled through the dark. The rivers shimmered like silver threads beneath the moon. And in that wilderness, Johnny saw not danger, but promise. To him, every tree was a companion, every breeze a prayer. They said the frontier belonged to those who could conquer it, with rifles, axes, and sweat. But Johnny never conquered. He simply walked, barefoot, through snow and mud, carrying with him the quiet rebellion of kindness. Where others saw land to claim, he saw soil to heal. Where others built walls, he planted roots. As seasons turned and years dissolved like mist, people began to speak of him, this wandering man with gentle eyes, wearing a tin pot as a hat, who never asked for shelter yet left orchards blooming in his wake. To some, he was a fool. To others, a saint. But to Johnny, he was neither. He was only a traveler between dreams and earth, trying to leave something sweet behind before the wind took him away. The story begins where the rivers bend westward, and where a man, carrying only seeds and faith, walks into the unknown, believing that one small act of goodness could one day shade an entire world. Acti, naming the dream. The dawn of the wilderness was unlike anywhere else. It carried no church bells, no smell of baked bread, no passing voices. There was only wind, open fields stretching endlessly, and the dim morning light falling like dew upon the grass. Johnny awoke in that mist, leaning against an old oak tree, beside his worn satchel of apple seeds. Every morning, as his eyes slowly opened, he saw the world waiting for him to begin again. No one knew why he left his hometown. Some whispered that Johnny once had a small house, a girl he loved, and a tiny orchard where apples blossomed each spring. But then came war, disease, or perhaps simply the changing of people's hearts, and he set off. One gray afternoon, he slung his bag over his shoulder, said goodbye to the past, and turned westward, toward the place where the sun still promised hope. The journey was not easy. Some days, rain poured relentlessly, soaking him to the bone. Some nights, he had only the sound of insects and the flickering firelight for warmth. Yet in that solitude, Johnny felt a strange peace. He believed that every step was a prayer, every seed dropped into the earth was a dream planted. Sometimes, on the road, he would stop in the middle of an empty field, dig a small hole, drop a few seeds in, and cover them lightly. He did not wait for them to sprout. He did not need to see the results. He did not need to see the results. One day, he often said, "A child will find shade here to play. A lover will have white blossoms fall in their hair." And then he would move on, quietly, as if the wind carried him forward. Occasionally, Johnny came to a small village, where people looked at him with suspicion. a wanderer with a tin pot on his head, barefoot, speaking of apples and dreams. Who could believe him? Yet when he smiled, soft and kind, and handed them a few seeds, his voice as gentle as a cloud, he would say, "Just plant them, the rest belongs to earth and sky." Children loved to hear his stories. He told them that every apple seed had a soul, that it could remember, love, and wait. He said that if one day they came upon an apple tree in the forest, they should bow in gratitude, for perhaps someone had passed that way before them. His words, simple as a breath, carried something that made people fall silent, as if a part of their hearts had been sown alongside the seeds. One evening, as Johnny rested by the Ohio River, he noticed Native Americans lighting fires in the distance. They watched him cautiously. He said nothing, only took a handful of seeds from his satchel and placed them gently on the ground, then stepped back. The chief approached, studied him long, then nodded quietly. From that day on, whenever he passed through their lands, he was welcomed with smiles and the scent of roasted corn. Johnny never stayed long in any place. He knew his dream had no destination, only a path. Every day, he walked a little further, planting a few more seeds. At night, he looked up at the stars. You need no money, no fame, no home. What are you seeking on this road? He smiled, eyes distant. I seek nothing. I only wish that when I pass, the land will be softer, the wind gentler, and the apples sweeter for others. It was the first, and also the last, time people heard him speak of his dream. As the sun set behind the mountains, his shadow blended with the twilight, leaving only streaks of light on the fields, as if his dream continued onward, beyond the bounds of human existence. And somewhere, a small apple sprout quietly emerged, greeting the first morning of its life. Johnny continued along the road that never seemed to end, through wild fields, dense forests, and rivers, glimmering under the moonlight. Every day, he encountered sights he had never seen before. Children laughing in open meadows, deer gliding through mountain valleys, flocks of birds skimming low over the lakes. Yet challenges came silently, as if the earth itself were testing him. Heavy rains pounded his back, soaking his clothes and his satchel of seeds. Snow blanketed the ground, chilling his calloused bare feet to numbness. Once, when crossing an ancient forest, thunder cracked across the sky, and wind howled through towering trees as if trying to sweep him away. Johnny bent low, clutching his bag of seeds, whispering to himself, "The apple seeds will live, and I will live. I only need to keep walking." Along the way, he met many kinds of people. Pioneers building homes on barren land, merchants quietly passing along red dirt roads, and Native American tribes living deep in the forest. Each encounter reflected the America that was forming. Wild yet full of opportunity, beautiful yet harsh. With each person he met, Johnny left a seed, a silent reminder that the world could still be gentle, even as it underwent storms and changes. Some nights he slept outdoors beneath thick canopies, listening to the predators of the forest nearby. One night, sitting by an old tree, he heard distant wolves howling. In the darkness, he held his satchel of seeds and whispered, "Every seed is a promise. I am not alone if the earth can hear me." At sunrise, snow still covered his shoulders, but Johnny stood and continued walking, as if fear had never existed. The long days on the road wore on his body, but his heart remained steadfast. He understood that the greatest trials were not the forces of nature, but human doubt, suspicion, and prejudice. Some looked at him with disdain. A man with a tin pot on his head, walking barefoot, scattering seeds everywhere. He must be crazy. But Johnny only smiled, knowing that those like him did not need to convince anyone. What he planted would grow in its own time, in its own way. One afternoon, Johnny stopped at a small village under construction. Villagers watched him carefully as he placed a few seeds in a patch of bare earth by the well. A curious boy ran up and asked, "What are you doing?" Johnny bent down, his eyes gentle, and answered, "I'm planting dreams. One day, someone will rest in their shade, taste their sweetness, long after I have gone." "You!" The boy looked at him, wide-eyed, not fully understanding, but feeling the warmth that radiated from the man. Johnny continued his journey. He crossed wide rivers, sometimes wading through ice-cold water, stepping on sharp stones and thick mud with his bare feet. One day, he came across a family of immigrants camping in a field. They looked at him warily, and he nodded, handed them a few seeds, and walked on. No explanations, no pleading, only the quiet act of giving, as natural as the wind passing through the grass. Along the way, Johnny learned to hear the whispers of nature, the flowing water, the rustling leaves, the low flight of birds. All told him that every small act had a result. He learned patience, how to wait. An apple seed lying in the earth might take years to sprout, but Johnny never hurried. He believed in the natural cycle, in the arrival of good things at the right time. Once, resting by a deserted riverbank, he wrote in the soil, "Every step is a prayer. Every seed is an untold story." Then he rose and walked on, leaving footprints and apple seeds behind, small but full of hope. Years passed, and Johnny not only endured the harshness of nature, but also the loneliness of the road. In every forest, field, and village, he found moments of connection, a child's smile, a grateful glance from an adult, the bird song at dawn. He realized that the greatest trials were not storms or snow, but believing in goodness in a world often harsh and cold. And yet he also encountered mockery, people who did not believe in his dream. A merchant once said, "You scatter seeds without watching them. What good will it do? They will die before you can see them." Johnny smiled, eyes distant. "I plant for tomorrow, not today. What I sow will live in its own way, even if I am no longer here." Through harsh winters and radiant springs, Johnny walked on, never resting, never complaining. He traversed the frontier, planting seeds, watching them merge with the earth, believing that one day these seeds would grow into orchards, providing shade, fruit, joy for children's eyes, and smiles for passers-by. Though weary, cold, and hungry, Johnny never gave up. He knew that the path he had chosen was not easy, but it was the path that would plant goodness in the world. Every step, every apple seed was a reminder. Hope exists, faith never disappears, and the world can still be gentle if one knows how to wait. As night fell, Johnny lay beneath a tree, listening to the wind singing, the river flowing, and the insects murmuring. He smiled, feeling the presence of all living things around him, and understood that it was the trials, loneliness, and hardships that taught him how to love, how to be patient, and how to see beauty in the smallest things. Somewhere, in the quiet forest, a tiny apple seed cracked open, a green sprout emerging from the earth. It felt Johnny's steps fade into the distance and began its own dream, a dream of shade, blossoms, and hope spreading quietly across the land. Johnny continued walking, but now each step felt heavier, not only because of his tired body, but because time had begun to leave its mark on his hair and in his deep eyes. The forests he had passed through had changed. The rivers he once crossed flowed longer in the memories of the people, and where he had sown seeds, the young apple trees were now sprouting, lush and promising sweet fruit in the seasons to come. One afternoon, he stopped to look at the apple groves he had planted. Golden sunlight fell on the leaves, sparkling like tiny crystals. The rustling of leaves in the wind was a gentle melody, and Johnny realized that he had planted not just apple seeds, but hope, faith, and patience. Those trees now provided shade for children to play, sweet fruit for passers-by, a place for people to pause, breathe, and smile. But for Johnny himself, those trees also reminded him of his solitude. He had no home, no family to return to, only feet that kept walking on a road that never ended. He looked at the distant villages, heard children laughing, and realized that he had become part of the land, part of what he had sown, yet he did not truly belong anywhere. He thought of his past, of the days when he was young and dreamed of a family, a bright home. Those dreams were now only gentle memories, like smoke drifting through the morning mist. Johnny understood that the price of living, according to his dream, was loneliness, but in return, he had sown something far greater than himself, a spiritual legacy, a journey others would continue. He passed through villages where people were now familiar with Johnny's presence. They no longer saw him as a strange man, but as a natural part of life. Children ran to greet him, their eyes wide with wonder, as if witnessing a miracle. Adults looked at him with respect and gratitude. Johnny merely smiled, bowed slightly, and kept walking, still sowing seeds, still spreading hope. One day, Johnny stood in a wide field, looking at rows of apple trees stretching far and wide, their branches spreading shade. He bent down, picked an apple, inhaled its gentle fragrance, and placed his hand on the soil. In that moment, he felt the life within the trees, the life within the earth, the life within the seeds he had planted. He realized that legacy was not just the apple trees, but the connection between people and nature, between past and present, between dreams and reality. Yet legacy also carried a quiet sadness. Johnny watched young children playing under the trees he had planted, knowing that one day he would not be there to see them grow. He would not witness the blossoms in spring, the ripe fruit being picked, the joyful laughter. He accepted this because his dream was not for himself, but for those who would come after. With every step, he left a part of himself in the soil, in the trees, in the wind. Yet he took from himself the comfort of home, the closeness, the private peace. In the final years of his journey, Johnny walked more slowly, his feet aching, but his eyes still bright and his heart warm. He stopped at a village where children were picking fruit from young trees. A little girl looked at him, eyes wide, and asked, "Did you plant these seeds?" Johnny nodded, eyes distant. "Yes. They will grow, and they will show others the goodness in the world." The girl smiled and ran off to tell her friends, and Johnny quietly continued walking. No need for recognition, no need for credit. Every autumn, when the apples ripened, Johnny walked familiar roads, inhaling the scent of fruit on the breeze, feeling life abound, and understanding that true value lay not in being remembered, but in what had been sown and continued after him. He knew that every seed was a reminder of hope, patience, and faith, that even if people leave, nature preserves their memory, and the world becomes better through small acts of goodness. Johnny once stood atop a high hill, looking at the endless apple orchards, and told himself that every tree, every fruit, every leaf was a part of his soul that had merged with the earth. He belonged nowhere, yet had become a part of everywhere. He smiled, feeling peace, yet carrying a gentle weight of loneliness. The price of living according to the dream he believed in. And so he kept walking. Every step, every apple seed that fell to the ground was a mark of sacrifice and patience. He knew his legacy would not be just the apple trees, but the spreading faith, the seed of goodness in a still wild world. Johnny understood that the value of life does not lie in recognition, but in planting kindness, in blending with nature and life, leaving something good for those who will come after. As night fell, Johnny sat by a tree, looking at the golden apples in the moonlight, knowing that the seeds he planted had sprouted in the hearts of others, and he continued walking, gently as the wind, leaving the traces of a life dissolved into earth and time. Johnny walked more slowly than ever. Autumn had arrived, bringing not only the crisp chill in the air, but also the final apples, glowing red under the pale sunlight. The fields where he had planted seeds many years ago had now become vast apple orchards, their branches spreading shade, their ripe fruits rolling on the ground, reminding him of the long journey of his life. He stopped beside an old apple tree, its leaves swaying with the wind. Johnny bent down, placed his hand on the trunk, and felt life flowing through each branch, root, and fruit. He recalled the first days of his journey westward, when everything was an open sky and untamed fields untouched by anyone. He remembered the snow, the pounding rain, the cold nights, and the muddy paths. But all those hardships, all those trials, had now crystallized into these autumn apples, these lush trees, and the seeds that would grow for future generations. A breeze passed, carrying the scent of damp earth and sweet apples. Johnny closed his eyes, inhaling deeply, feeling each breath merge with the surrounding nature. He realized that this final apple season was not only a harvest for others, but also a harvest for his own soul. The trees, the fruits, were reminders of patience, unconditional love, and the value of planting goodness. Children from nearby villages ran up, picking apples and laughing. Adults watched them, then looked at Johnny with eyes full of gratitude. A little girl ran to him, holding up an apple. "Sir, this one is delicious." Johnny smiled, his eyes sparkling yet carrying a gentle sadness. He knew that one day he would no longer be here to see the apple seasons, the smiles, the children's footsteps. Yet he accepted it, for true value lies not in witnessing, but in sowing and letting life continue. Johnny sat down beside the largest apple tree, gazing at the red, ripe fruit above. He thought of all the people he had met along the way, the rainy days, the freezing nights. He realized that all these experiences, all the hardships and loneliness, had shaped him and had helped him plant seeds not only in the soil, but also in the hearts of others. As the sun set, painting the sky with pale orange, Johnny looked out over the endless apple orchards. He knew that this final harvest marked the end of a long journey, but also the beginning of new stories, new hopes. The apple seeds he had planted would continue to grow, providing shade, sweet fruit, and joy for children and strangers passing through this world. In that quiet moment, Johnny felt a gentle loneliness spread through his heart, yet also a profound peace. He had lived, he had walked, he had planted, and finally, he saw his legacy before him. The apple seasons, the green trees, the ripe fruit, all were part of him, but also a gift to the world, to those who would follow in his footsteps. He stood, walking slowly through the orchard, leaving his footprints beside the old apple trees. The wind blew, the leaves rustled, apples rolled across the ground. Johnny smiled, knowing that his journey was complete, but the seeds, the trees, and the faith in a better world would continue to live on. He continued toward the horizon, gently as the wind, merging with the earth and sky, leaving the trace of a life dissolved into nature and time, like a story that never ends. And as night fell, the apple trees quietly swayed in the wind, as if whispering Johnny's story to the world, about patience, about faith, about sacrifice, and about the unconditional love that one human being could plant for life itself.